Have you ever opened a door in your own
Okay,
home,
are you all right?
only to find a secret that should never have been hidden? When this millionaire father returned from a business trip, he never imagined what he'd find behind his daughter's wall, a truth that would shatter his heart and change his life forever. Before we go on, allow me to wish you peace and good health. Tell me, from which country and at what time are you watching this story? Every house in Shelburne glowed with warm yellow light that November evening, except the white farmhouse on Lake Road, where Elliot Warren kept most of the lights off. Outside, the maple trees had lost their last leaves, and rain dripped steadily from the porch roof, tapping on the wooden steps like a quiet clock. Inside, the sound of a computer keyboard filled the air, steady and distant, echoing through the long hallway that led to the kitchen. Elliot sat in his office, surrounded by polished wood and silence. His tie was still knotted from work, though it was past 8 o'clock. On his desk stood a framed photo of his late wife, Eleanor, smiling on a summer day by Lake Champlain. He never moved it, yet he rarely looked at it. In the next room, 9-year-old Lily sat at the kitchen table, swinging her legs and watching the rain through the window. She had drawn something, a picture of a small house with glowing windows and 2 stick figures holding hands under a maple tree. The crayon marks were soft, almost trembling. When she heard footsteps in the hall, she quickly covered the drawing with her notebook. Clara Devine appeared in the doorway, elegant as ever, wearing a pale blue cardigan. "Sweetheart, your father's still on a call," she said softly. "Let's not disturb him tonight." Lily nodded, her voice small. "Okay. Clara smiled the way people do when they want things to seem calm. "You should finish your soup. It's getting cold." She placed her manicured hand on Lily's shoulder for a moment before walking away. The touch was gentle, but it left the child's shoulders tense. Maggie Hayes, the housekeeper, watched quietly from the stove. She had been with the family long before Clara arrived. She served the soup creamy tomato with a piece of toasted bread and set it down. "Eat a little, honey," she murmured. "It'll help you sleep." Lily lifted her spoon and whispered, "Sometimes the house feels too quiet, Maggie." Maggie smiled faintly. "Houses are like people, dear. They take their time to get used to change." Later that night, when the dishes were clean and the rain had stopped, Lily tiptoed upstairs. Her room smelled faintly of lavender and new paint. The wallpaper had tiny blue flowers, and in the corner, her mother's old rocking chair sat untouched. She slid under the blanket, hugging a worn stuffed rabbit. A faint sound broke the stillness, a soft tapping, like fingers brushing the wall behind her bed. Lily's eyes opened wide. "Mom?" she whispered. The sound stopped. She waited, breath held, then whispered again. "Mom, is that you?" The wind answered by creaking the window frame. She turned on her nightlight, a small globe that cast warm amber light over the room. The wall looked smooth, harmless. Still, she could not sleep. Downstairs, Elliot finished his meeting and rubbed his temples. His assistant's voice on the speakerphone asked about tomorrow's agenda, but he barely heard it. When he finally closed the laptop, he sat in silence, staring at the framed photo. "You'd know what to do," he muttered. "You always did." The sound of rain had faded, leaving only the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. He rose, loosened his tie, and glanced toward the staircase. A soft yellow light glowed from Lily's room upstairs. He almost went up, but stopped halfway, remembering Clara's words. "She's adjusting. Don't worry her more." He turned off the living room lamp and stood by the window, looking out into the dark Vermont night. The lake beyond the trees reflected no stars, only the faint shimmer of town lights far away. Somewhere behind him, the floor creaked lightly, and a door clicked shut. Elliot didn't turn. Upstairs, Lily was wide awake, the nightlight flickering. The tapping returned, slower this time, like someone gently knocking from inside the wall. Lily didn't sleep that night. She kept her eyes on the glow of the nightlight until it dimmed to a pale shadow, then hid her face under the blanket. At some point, she thought she heard soft footsteps in the hallway, followed by the faint click of her door closing tighter. When morning came, pale sunlight poured through her window, bouncing off the frost that had formed overnight. The world outside looked frozen and still, like a painting. Maggie was already in the kitchen, humming softly to an old radio tune, frying eggs in a cast-iron pan. "Morning, sweetheart," she greeted as Lily walked in, hair tangled, eyes sleepy. "You didn't get much rest, did you?" Lily rubbed her eyes. The wall was noisy again. "It's like someone's behind it." Maggie frowned, lowering the flame. "Maybe just the pipes, honey. Old houses like this talk sometimes." Clara came in a few moments later, wrapped in a silk robe, her tone brisk but cheerful. "Pipes, imagination, same thing," she said, reaching for a cup of coffee. "Children have such wild dreams." She turned to Lily. "You're brave, though. You don't need to let silly sounds scare you." Lily nodded politely, though her eyes fell to the floor. Clara leaned down and brushed a hand through her hair, but there was something controlled, almost rehearsed, in the gesture. After breakfast, Clara drove into town to meet Elliot at his office, and the house fell quiet again. Maggie began sweeping the kitchen when she noticed something under the table, a folded piece of paper with faint crayon marks. She picked it up and opened it carefully. It was Lily's drawing. The same house, but this time the windows were dark. In one corner there was a small square shape like a door colored in solid black. Beside it, the shaky handwriting of a child read, "Mom says the dark is not safe." Maggie felt a chill run down her spine. She looked toward the staircase. "Lily," she called softly. No answer. She climbed the stairs and peeked into Lily's room. The little girl sat by the window, staring at the wall opposite her bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Darlin', did you draw this?" Maggie asked gently. Lily nodded. "Mom told me about the door. She said not to open it when it's dark." Maggie's heart tightened. "Your mama loved you very much, you know that?" Lily turned to her, voice trembling. "I think she's still here, Maggie. I hear her at night." Before Maggie could reply, the sound of tires crunching on gravel echoed outside the family car returning. Clara's laughter carried faintly through the air as the front door opened downstairs. "Lily, I'm home!" "Ugh." Lily quickly hid the drawing behind her pillow. Maggie gave her a reassuring look, pressing a finger to her lips. "We'll talk later, sweet pea." That evening, Elliot returned late again. The house smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary. Clara poured wine into 2 glasses and handed one to him, her smile practiced. "Another long day?" He nodded, loosening his tie. "They always are." His eyes wandered toward the staircase. "Did Lily eat dinner?" "She did," Clara answered smoothly. "She's fine, Elliot. She just needs routine." Elliot sighed and sat by the fireplace. "Maybe I'll check on her." Clara placed a hand on his arm, soft but firm. "Let her sleep. She's adjusting, remember?" He hesitated, then nodded. Upstairs, Lily was indeed awake, staring at the ceiling as the house settled into silence. Maggie passed by her room later, leaving the hallway lamp dimly lit. For a while, everything seemed still. Then, just after midnight, the sound came again, a soft, deliberate tapping behind the wall. Not like pipes. Not like wind. Lily held her breath, eyes wide open. The tapping grew slower, deeper, almost as if whoever was behind the wall was waiting for her to answer. And somewhere downstairs, Elliot stirred in his sleep, unaware of the small, frightened voice that whispered into the dark. "Mom?" That night, the tapping returned, this time, louder. By late November, Shelburne had already changed its colors. The maples were bare, their branches dressed in frost, and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke from the neighbors' chimneys. Thanksgiving was near, and along the main street, small diners hung garlands of orange lights. Yet in the Warren farmhouse, the warmth never quite settled. The table was set that evening, roast turkey, mashed potatoes, a pumpkin pie that Maggie had baked that morning. The silverware gleamed beneath the chandelier, but only 3 places were arranged. Clara liked things orderly, almost perfect. "It's important," she said, "that Lily learns gratitude." Lily sat across from her father, small hands folded in her lap. Elliot looked tired, distracted, his phone buzzing on the table beside his plate. "Just one last call," he murmured. But Clara gave him a pointed look. "It can wait, Elliot," she said softly, her tone, the kind that sounded polite but carried a sharp edge. "Let's be thankful first." He sighed and put the phone face down. "All right." For a moment, the family bowed their heads. Clara led the grace, her voice smooth and practiced. "For this home, for growth, for courage. Then, looking at Lily, she added, and for learning to face our fears. Lily whispered a quiet, "Amen," her eyes downcast. Maggie stood in the corner, pretending to adjust a vase of flowers, but watching the scene carefully. Dinner began. Clara spoke of her plans, how she wanted to turn one of the basement rooms into a small therapy space for children. "Exposure therapy," she explained, slicing her turkey neatly. "It's how we help the mind unlearn fear. Even Lily can benefit." Elliot looked up. "She's just a child, Clara. She's had a rough year." "All the more reason," Clara said gently, "to start early. Healing takes structure." She reached to brush Lily's hair from her forehead. "Doesn't it, sweetheart?" Lily nodded quickly, though she didn't seem to understand. After dinner, Maggie brought out pie and set it quietly on the counter. As she did, she caught Lily glancing toward her father, as if hoping he'd say something, but Elliot only smiled faintly, lost in thought. The girl pushed her plate away. "May I go draw, Daddy?" she asked softly. "Of course," he said. When Lily left the table, Clara turned to Elliot, voice low. "She still avoids her room. I think she's letting imagination control her. We have to help her face it." Elliot hesitated. "What do you mean?" 30 seconds a night, Clara said, as if she were describing something scientific. "In a dark room. I'll stay near her. It's perfectly safe. She needs to learn courage." Maggie froze mid-motion, her hands still on the dish towel. "Children don't learn courage that way, ma'am," she said quietly. Clara's smile faltered. "You clean the floors, Maggie. Leave the psychology to me." Elliot's jaw tightened. He hated conflict, and Clara knew it. He muttered something about being tired and stood up to take a phone call. The room fell into silence, except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. When he returned later, Lily was already in her pajamas. Clara stood by the basement door, holding a small flashlight. "Just a little exercise, darling," she told the girl kindly. "You'll see, it's not so scary." Lily clutched her stuffed rabbit, eyes wide. "It's dark down there." Clara crouched beside her. "Darkness isn't bad, Lily. It's just empty space waiting for light. Let's count to 30 together." Maggie appeared at the top of the stairs. "Miss Clara, maybe we try something else." "It's fine," Clara interrupted, her voice smooth as glass. "Therapeutic exposure. Perfectly fine." The door closed softly behind them, and Maggie stood alone in the hallway, the ticking clock suddenly louder than before. Inside the basement, the air was cold, dry. Clara's flashlight rested on a shelf. Its beam pointed toward the floor. "All right, sweetheart," she whispered. "Count with me. 1, 2, 3. Lily's voice trembled. 4, 5. Upstairs. Maggie paced by the door, listening. The seconds felt heavy, stretching endlessly. Then she couldn't stand it any longer. She pulled the door open. Light spilled down the stairs. Lily stood near the wall, tears glistening on her cheeks. Clara blinked at the sudden brightness, irritation flashing in her eyes. Clara's expression shifted as Maggie's flashlight flooded the basement. "We were practicing courage," she said evenly, stepping protectively in front of Lily. "See? She's fine." Lily blinked in the light, her cheeks wet. Maggie's heart ached. "Fine's not the word I'd use," she whispered. She reached for the little girl, but Clara straightened her shoulders, her smile tight. Elliot's footsteps echoed above them. "What's going on down here?" "Nothing serious," Clara answered before Maggie could speak. "Just an exercise we talked about." Maggie glanced up the stairs, meeting Elliot's tired eyes. "She was scared," she said softly. "That's all." Elliot looked from one woman to the other. The air hung thick with things unsaid. Finally, he sighed. "Let's call it a night." "Oh." Clara nodded quickly, brushing off her hands as if nothing had happened. She led Lily back upstairs, humming a lullaby under her breath. Maggie stayed behind to tidy up, her hands shaking slightly as she turned off the basement light. Later, when she walked past Lily's room, she heard the faint sound of the child whispering her numbers in the dark. 1, 2, 3. Maggie paused, tears pricking her eyes. She wanted to open the door, but she didn't want to wake Elliot. Instead, she went to the kitchen, poured herself a small glass of milk, and sat by the window until the clock struck midnight. Down the hall, Elliot stood in his study, staring at the dim glow of the security monitor. One of the screens flickered the basement camera. He frowned, not remembering when Clara had installed it. The small red light blinked steadily in the corner of the feed. When Clara appeared in the doorway, he turned to her. "I didn't know we had cameras down there." "Oh, just temporary," she said lightly. "For safety. You're always away, and I thought it wise to monitor the house." Elliot nodded, though something about her tone unsettled him. Upstairs, Lily finally fell asleep, her stuffed rabbit pressed to her chest. The house seemed quiet again, as if trying to convince itself that everything was normal. Maggie cleaned the dishes in silence, listening to the faint creaks of the old farmhouse. When she finished, she looked out the kitchen window toward the dark lake beyond the trees. "Something's not right here," she murmured. In the distance, thunder rolled over the mountains. As the clock neared 1, the camera light in the basement blinked once, then twice, before going still, its tiny red glow the only thing alive in the dark. Snow had come early that December. By morning, the fields behind the Warren farmhouse were white and still, and the air smelled of pine and chimney smoke. Maggie woke before dawn to shovel the steps, her breath rising in small clouds. Inside, the house slept under a blanket of silence, except for the low hum of the heater and the faint, uneven creak of floorboards. When Lily came down for breakfast, her eyes looked heavy, with dark circles that didn't belong on a child's face. Maggie poured her a cup of warm cocoa and said softly, "Did you sleep any better, honey?" Lily shook her head. The wall was talking again. Maggie tried to smile, but her chest tightened. "Maybe it's the wind, sweetheart. Sometimes it rattles the pipes." Lily leaned closer, whispering, "It wasn't the wind. It said my name this time." Before Maggie could respond, Clara entered the kitchen, perfectly composed in a cream-colored sweater. "Good morning," she said brightly. "Lily, drink your cocoa. You have a big day ahead." "A big day?" Maggie asked. Clara smiled, stirring her coffee. "I thought I'd try another session in the basement after lunch. We're making progress." Maggie froze. "It's been only a few nights, ma'am. Maybe she needs rest more than courage." Clara's voice stayed pleasant, but her eyes were sharp. Children need consistency. That's how the mind learns. Elliot entered then, adjusting his coat. "What's going on?" Clara turned to him instantly, her smile warm again. "Nothing, darling. Just talking about Lily's progress." Lily kept her gaze on the table, tracing circles on the wood with her finger. Outside, snow fell harder. Elliot kissed Clara's cheek, gave Lily a distracted pat on the shoulder, and left for his office in Burlington. His truck disappeared down the white road, and the sound of the engine faded into the still air. By midday, Maggie was folding laundry upstairs when she heard Clara's voice coming from the basement. "Ready, Lily? Just 30 seconds." The words made Maggie's stomach knot. She put down the towels and went to the top of the stairs. The door was half open. Inside, she heard the sound of Lily counting, trembling.
1, 2, 3.
Then a pause, a small whimper. Maggie's heart pounded. She stepped closer but stopped when she saw the faint red blink of a small camera near the shelf. Clara's voice came again, soft but firm. "You're doing great. Don't cry." When the 30 seconds ended, Clara opened the door and led Lily up by the hand.
"See? Bravery gets easier every day,"
she said. Lily's cheeks were wet. She didn't answer. Maggie turned away before Clara could see her standing there. That evening, when the family gathered for dinner, the air felt heavy. Elliot spoke about a potential business merger, his voice flat, rehearsed. Lily picked at her food. Clara smiled politely at her husband and filled his glass with water. Maggie stayed near the counter, pretending to clean, but her eyes never left Lily. The girl's small shoulders were trembling. Under the table, she was holding something, a folded piece of paper. When Clara stepped away to answer the phone, Maggie whispered, "You all right, honey?" Lily unfolded the paper just enough for her to see. It was another drawing, 2 stick figures, one standing in light, one behind a dark wall. Underneath, in shaky letters, "Don't let her turn off the lights." The storm outside grew thicker as the night pressed in. By the time Elliot returned from Burlington, the windows were rimmed with frost and the drive was covered in snow. His boots left dark prints across the entryway rug. Clara met him at the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Busy day? Too busy, he said, hanging his coat. How's Lily? She's adjusting, Clara replied quickly. We had another breakthrough this afternoon. Maggie, wiping the counter, froze at the word breakthrough. She caught Elliot's gaze for a moment, then looked away. Lily appeared from the hallway, wearing her pajamas and holding her stuffed rabbit. Hi, Daddy, she said softly. Elliot knelt and brushed a hand through her hair. Hey, sweetheart, you look tired. She's doing fine, Clara interrupted, her voice bright. A little sleepy, that's all. Oh, wow. Maggie watched in silence, noticing how Lily flinched slightly at Clara's touch. After dinner, the house grew quiet. Elliot went to his study to check emails, and Maggie finished the dishes. Upstairs, Clara tucked Lily into bed, whispering something Maggie couldn't hear. When Clara's footsteps faded, Maggie crept up the stairs and paused outside the child's room. Lily? She whispered. The girl sat up, eyes glinting in the low light. Maggie, there are wires in my wall. Maggie blinked. Wires? Look, Lily said, pointing to a small corner where the wallpaper peeled slightly. Behind it, a thin silver cable ran downward, disappearing behind the molding. Maggie's stomach sank. Where does it go, honey? To the basement, I think, Lily said. That's where the sound comes from. Maggie traced the cable with her fingers, then quickly pressed the wallpaper back. Don't worry about it now. Try to rest. She smiled gently. I'll check it out tomorrow. Place. When she went downstairs, the sound of Clara's voice drifted from the kitchen. Maggie stopped in the hallway, hidden by the shadow of the staircase. He's close to signing, Clara was saying quietly. Yes, Jonathan, just a few more days. Once it's done, we're free. Maggie's heart thudded. Jonathan Pierce, the same man Elliot mentioned as his business partner. Clara's tone was smooth, her laughter low. Trust me, she said. He doesn't suspect a thing. The phone clicked off. Clara stood for a moment, staring out the kitchen window, then poured herself a glass of wine and walked away. Maggie waited until she was gone, then stepped into the light. Her hands were trembling. She looked toward the ceiling, where Lily's room was, then toward the basement door. Something was deeply wrong. That night, the wind moaned across the fields, and snow piled against the windowsills. Around midnight, Maggie awoke to a faint creak. She sat up on her narrow bed by the pantry, listening. Footsteps. Soft, slow. She slipped on her robe and opened the door. The hallway was dim, the only light coming from the clock in the living room. Upstairs, a door hinge squealed. Lily? Maggie whispered. The little girl was standing halfway down the stairs, barefoot, eyes half open. Her stuffed rabbit hung from one hand. Sweetheart? Lily didn't answer. Her small voice murmured something, dreamy and far away. Mom's calling me from the light. Then she turned toward the basement door. Maggie's breath caught. She rushed forward, kneeling beside her. No, honey, not there. Lily blinked slowly as if waking from a dream. Her eyes filled with tears. She says it's bright down there now. Maggie gathered her in her arms. Let's go back to bed, all right? You can tell me in the morning. As Maggie carried her upstairs, the old farmhouse groaned in the wind. Behind them, at the bottom of the stairwell, a faint red light blinked once from the basement, steady, patient, watching. By morning, the snow had swallowed the world outside. The driveway was a white river, the fence posts nearly buried, and the maple trees bowed under the weight of the storm. Maggie stood at the kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, watching the flakes drift in slow, lazy spirals. Upstairs, Lily was still asleep, curled under a quilt. Clara moved quietly through the house, humming a tune too sweet for the gray morning. Elliot had gone early, his truck barely managing to plow through the snow-covered road toward town. Maggie waited until she heard the front door close behind Clara. She'd gone out to feed the chickens, or maybe to make a phone call where no one could hear. Either way, it was her moment. She took a flashlight, slipped off her shoes, and opened the basement door. The air was colder than she remembered. It carried the faint metallic scent of paint and something else stale, heavy, like a place that didn't want to be disturbed. The light from the kitchen above stretched halfway down the stairs before dying into darkness. Maggie's steps echoed softly on the wood. At the bottom, she found the familiar shelves, the old workbench, and the camera's small red light still glowing. Why is that on? She murmured. Her flashlight swept across the far wall. The paint was new, too new compared to the rest of the basement. Beneath the white surface, faint outlines of something rectangular showed through, like seams hidden under skin. Maggie reached out, running her hand along the wall. The texture changed midway smooth, then slightly uneven. Her fingers brushed a small ridge. A faint clicking sound followed. The seam gave way. A sliver of air escaped, cold and sharp. Her flashlight beam trembled as she leaned closer. Behind the wall, the faint outline of a narrow door became clear. "Oh, my Lord," she whispered. It wasn't in the house plans. She'd seen those when cleaning the study. Her heart pounded as she pressed the edge again. The wall shifted slightly, revealing a narrow space, just enough for her to see inside a small white room with a low ceiling. The floor gleamed faintly under the flashlight. In the center stood a wooden chair. Beside it, on a table, was a small hourglass. Maggie froze, the world narrowing to that single image. The sand inside the glass was still running halfway through its time. A faint sound came from the far corner, a soft mechanical hum. Maggie's light found a small black lens near the ceiling, pointed directly at the chair. "Good heavens," she breathed. Then, footsteps above. Slow, deliberate. Maggie turned off the flashlight, heart hammering. The basement light flicked on. "Maggie?" Clara's voice drifted down, calm as ever. "What are you doing down there?" Maggie stepped back from the wall, forcing her breath steady. "Just checking the pipes. They're rattling again." Clara appeared at the top of the stairs, her figure framed by the bright light. "You're always so helpful," she said, her tone soft but heavy. "Be careful, it's slippery down there." Maggie nodded, eyes fixed on the steps. "Yes, ma'am. Emselair." Clara lingered a moment longer, her gaze sweeping the basement before she closed the door. When Maggie exhaled, her hands were shaking. She turned the flashlight back toward the hidden seam. This time, the door was shut tight, like it had never been open. That night, the storm deepened. Snow piled against the windows, muffling every sound. The power flickered once, then steadied. Maggie sat in her small room, staring at the camera she'd borrowed from her nephew months ago, a simple handheld recorder. She slipped it into her apron pocket. When the grandfather clock struck 10, the house fell quiet. Clara had said goodnight an hour earlier, her voice floating down the hall like perfume. Elliot was in his study, half asleep over his laptop. Only Lily's soft breathing came from upstairs. Maggie waited a few minutes, then crept toward the basement door. Each step seemed to echo through the walls. She pressed her ear against the wood. Nothing, only the hum of the furnace. She opened it slowly. The light was already on. At first, she thought she'd imagined it. But no, the faint yellow glow spilled up the stairs. She descended carefully, one hand gripping the railing. When she reached the bottom, she froze. The wall, the one that had opened earlier, was slightly ajar again. From inside came the low murmur of Clara's voice. 30 seconds, my darling. Just 30. You can do this." Maggie's throat tightened. She crouched beside a stack of old boxes, lifting her camera to the small crack in the door. Inside, Lily sat on the wooden chair, trembling. Her hands clutched the stuffed rabbit to her chest. The room glowed white, spotless, mercilessly bright. Clara stood by the wall, her posture elegant, her hand resting on a switch. She smiled gently. "You remember what I told you? When the darkness comes, don't fight it. Embrace it." Lily's voice was barely a whisper. "Please, I don't want to—" "Shh," Clara cooed. "Be brave for Mommy." Then she pressed the button. The light snapped off. The sound that followed was small and human and unbearable, a child's sob breaking into a scream. Maggie's hand trembled. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she pressed record. 30 seconds passed. Then Clara's voice again, calm and proud. "Good job, sweetheart. You're learning." When the light returned, Lily was curled on the floor, shaking. Clara knelt, stroking her hair. "Your father will thank me one day," she murmured. Maggie bit her lip hard to keep from making a sound. After Clara carried Lily upstairs, humming softly, Maggie slipped into the room. The air was cold, sharp with metal and paint. The hourglass on the table was still half full. She aimed the camera around, capturing every detail: the chair, the switch, the tiny black lens watching from above. She turned toward the doorframe and whispered, "Dear God, help this child." When she emerged from the basement, the house was silent again. She hid the camera in her closet, then leaned against the wall, trembling. Snow tapped gently against the window panes. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked slow, deliberate. Clara's voice floated down the hall, soft as silk. "Maggie, are you awake?" Maggie didn't answer. She held her breath, eyes fixed on the crack under her door. A shadow paused there, unmoving. Then footsteps drifted away. Only when the house settled did Maggie whisper into the dark, "Tomorrow, I tell him everything." But deep down, she already feared the truth that Elliot might not want to hear it. Outside, the wind carried the snow across the frozen lake, covering the world once more in silence. The next morning, the world looked new under the snow. Sunlight bounced off every surface, too bright, too pure for what Maggie carried inside her chest. She stood by the kitchen sink, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold, her thoughts heavy as the frost on the window panes. Upstairs, Lily was still asleep. Elliot had left early, driving into Burlington for another round of meetings, while Clara moved through the house with her usual polished calm, humming a hymn as she watered the plants. Her voice made Maggie's stomach twist. When Clara finally stepped outside to collect the mail, Maggie ran upstairs, heart hammering. She went straight to the closet in her small room, pulled out the camera, and hid it inside her wool coat. Then she grabbed her keys. She didn't stop until she reached the village diner, a small, warm place where the smell of bacon and maple syrup filled the air, the kind of place where people said good morning, even to strangers. She sat at the counter, ordered a coffee she didn't drink, and plugged the camera into her nephew's old laptop. Her hand shook as the screen came to life. The image appeared. The white room, the chair, the child's trembling body, Clara's soft voice whispering instructions. Then darkness, then the sound, that raw, breaking cry. Maggie covered her mouth to stop the sob that rose in her throat. She knew then there was no more waiting, no more hoping Clara would stop on her own. She closed the laptop and stared out the window. Snowflakes drifted lazily past the glass, landing on the sidewalk before vanishing. The world outside kept moving calm, ordinary, unaware. Back at the farmhouse, Clara was already in the kitchen when Maggie returned. She smiled politely. "Out for errands?" "Yes," Maggie replied, setting her purse down. "Picked up some flour." "How thoughtful." Clara's tone was soft, but her eyes darted briefly to the coat pocket where the camera hid. "You always take care of everyone." Maggie forced a smile. "That's what I'm here for." Later that afternoon, when Elliot came home, Maggie waited until he set his briefcase on the counter. "Sir, may I speak with you privately?" He looked surprised, but nodded. "Of course." They went into his study, the room that still smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. Maggie closed the door and took out the camera. "There's something you need to see," she said quietly. Elliot frowned. "Is this about Clara? Maggie, if this is another—" "Please," she interrupted, voice trembling. "Just watch." She pressed play. The footage filled the small screen with that cold white light, that cruelly gentle voice, that sound of a little girl begging for her mother. For a long time, Elliot didn't speak. His face went pale, his hands gripping the desk until his knuckles turned white. "That's not possible," he whispered. "She told me it was therapy, exposure to fear. Maggie's eyes filled with tears. "Sir, this isn't therapy. It's torment." Elliot stood, pacing. "She said the doctor approved." "Then ask the doctor," Maggie said firmly, "because no good doctor would ever do that to a child." He sank back into his chair, staring at the frozen frame Clara kneeling beside Lily, the hourglass half full. Finally, he whispered, "Dear God, what have I done?" For the rest of that afternoon, the house was unnaturally quiet. Outside, the sky dimmed into a pewter gray, and the wind moved through the bare branches like a whisper of warning. Elliot sat alone in his study, the video frozen on the screen. Clara's smile faint, serene glowed from the monitor, a portrait of control. He finally reached for his phone. His hands shook as he scrolled through contacts until he found the number he hadn't called in years, Dr. Herrera. The call connected after 3 rings. "Dr. Herrera speaking. Doctor, this is Elliot Warren." His voice cracked slightly. My wife mentioned you've been seeing our daughter Lily through a home therapy program. A pause. Then, confusion. Mr. Warren, I haven't treated a child named Lily Warren. Not now. Not ever. Elliot froze. Are you certain? My wife said you. I'm quite certain, the doctor interrupted gently. I don't conduct home therapy. Whoever told you that is misusing my name. The line went silent, except for Elliot's shallow breathing. Thank you, he finally whispered and ended the call. He sat for a long time, staring at the phone, feeling something inside him break apart not with rage, but with disbelief, with grief for what he hadn't seen. When Clara entered a few minutes later, she carried a tray with a cup of tea. You look pale, she said softly. You should rest. Elliot looked up at her, his expression unreadable. I called Dr. Herrera. Clara's smile faltered, but only for a heartbeat. You must have reached the wrong one. There are several. No, he said quietly. He knew your name. He said he's never treated Lily. The teacup clinked faintly against the saucer as Clara set it down. Her eyes stayed on the desk, her voice calm but lower now. Elliot, you've been under so much stress. You're hearing what you want to hear. He rose from his chair. Stop. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. I saw the video. She lifted her gaze slowly, a small, controlled smile returning to her lips. Ah. So, she showed you. Maggie showed me what I was too blind to see. For a brief moment, Clara said nothing. Then she turned toward the window, watching the snow drift down. Everything I did was for Lily, she murmured. You let her live in fear after Elena's death. Someone had to teach her strength. Elliot's voice trembled. Strength isn't learned in darkness. Clara turned back, eyes glinting. You think love saves children? It weakens them. Elena loved too much. Look where that got her. The words hit him like a slap. Don't you speak her name. For the first time, her composure cracked. She was fragile, Elliot. You needed someone who could carry the weight you never could. He took a slow step forward. And you thought you could fix that by torturing my daughter? Clara exhaled, her voice softening again, almost tender. It wasn't torture. It was transformation. Elliot stared at her, and in that moment he understood this woman truly believed every word. He backed away, his hand brushing against the phone on his desk. I'm taking Lily to my sister's tonight, he said quietly. And tomorrow, I'm going to the sheriff. Clara's smile returned, smaller this time, brittle as glass. Be careful, Elliot. Snowy roads can be unpredictable. He froze, studying her face. There was no fear in her, only certainty, the calm of someone who had already planned ahead. Maggie knocked gently on the door then, her voice soft. Sir, dinner's ready. Elliot took a breath, forcing steadiness back into his tone. Thank you, Maggie. We'll be down in a minute. Clara's eyes flicked toward the door, then back to him. You won't do anything rash, she said, almost a whisper. He didn't answer. As she left the room, Elliot sank into his chair again, covering his face with his hands. Outside, the last of the daylight faded behind the snowy fields. Somewhere upstairs, Lily's laughter briefly echoed, light and small and real. For the first time in years, Elliot let himself cry. That night, the snow had stopped, leaving the world eerily still. The moon hung low over Shelburne, lighting the frozen fields behind the farmhouse in a soft silver glow. Inside, the air felt too quiet, like the house itself was holding its breath. Maggie stood at the sink, drying the last of the dinner plates. The clock ticked softly on the wall, marking each second with slow precision. Across the room, Elliot sat at the table with his hands clasped, his untouched coffee growing cold. Clara had excused herself early, saying she needed to check something in the basement. She's been down there a while, Maggie murmured. Elliot didn't look up. I know. And he'd been silent since their conversation in the study. His shoulders seemed heavier, his eyes sunken from sleepless nights. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. I called my sister in Montpelier. She'll take Lily and you tonight. I'll follow after sunrise. Maggie nodded, relief mixing with fear. You told her everything? Enough, he said. Enough to keep Lily safe. Footsteps sounded overhead, soft, deliberate. Both looked up. Then came another sound, faint but distinct, the creak of the basement door opening. Elliot rose slowly, his chair scraping the floor. "I'll handle it," he said, though his voice shook. Maggie caught his sleeve. "Please, be careful." He gave a small nod, then moved toward the basement. The air grew colder as he descended, the wooden steps groaning under his weight. The basement light was on again. Clara stood near the workbench, a small suitcase at her feet. She turned when she heard him. "Elliot," she said softly. "I was just packing a few things for the morning." His eyes flicked to the suitcase. "Running?" She smiled faintly. "Leaving before you make another mistake." He stepped closer. "You already made it for me." Her voice dropped, almost tender. "You think taking her away will save her? Fear doesn't vanish, it waits. And when it comes back, she'll be weaker than before." He shook his head. "She needs love, not lessons in darkness." Clara studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Love didn't save Elena," she said finally. The words hung between them like smoke. Elliot's voice hardened. "You have no right to speak her name again." Clara's lips curved into a small, sad smile. "You still don't see it, do you? You're trying to fix your guilt by blaming me. But I didn't build the darkness in this house, you did." He flinched as if struck. "I only used what was already here," she continued, stepping closer. "Elena's silence. Your absence. Lily's nightmares. I just gave them shape." For the first time, Elliot saw something in her eyes that chilled him more than anger, sincerity. She truly believed every word. He steadied himself. "You're sick, Clara, and this ends tonight." For a long, frozen second, neither of them moved. Then Clara exhaled softly, her tone almost pitying. "You won't make it far. The roads are iced, and the phone lines are still down. And Maggie?" She tilted her head. "She's too loyal to leave without your permission." Elliot's jaw tightened. "You underestimate her." From upstairs came the sound of a door opening, then Lily's frightened voice calling, "Daddy!" Elliot turned toward the stairs. "Stay here," he said sharply. But when he looked back, Clara was already moving swift and silent toward the wall. Her hand brushed something behind the shelf, and a faint click echoed through the room. Elliot froze. "What did you do?" She smiled, calm and cold, "Just making sure no one leaves too soon." A low metallic sound rumbled beneath them, the unmistakable noise of locks sliding into place. The sound of the locks sliding shut echoed through the basement like a whisper of finality. Elliot's heart pounded. "Clara, what did you just lock?" "The back doors," she said calmly. "The garage. The side gate." Her voice carried the eerie calm of someone who had prepared for this moment. "You always wanted control, Elliot. Now you have none." He stepped toward her, fists clenched but trembling. "Open them. Now." Clara tilted her head, the faintest smile playing at the corner of her lips. "You'll thank me when the storm passes. Families need to stay together during difficult nights." From upstairs came Lily's frightened call again. "Daddy! Maggie can't open the door!" Elliot bolted for the stairs, taking them two at a time. The moment he reached the top, Maggie was there, pulling at the back latch with all her strength. "It's sealed tight," she gasped. "Take Lily to the front room," he shouted. Maggie grabbed the little girl, wrapping her coat around her. "It's okay, honey. We'll be fine." Her voice was shaking, but she forced warmth into it. Elliot turned back to the stairwell. "Clara!" he shouted. "You're scaring her!" Her voice floated up, smooth as honey. "Fear teaches truth, remember?" Something inside Elliot broke. He rushed back down, his steps echoing off the cold concrete. Clara stood beside the hidden door, her hand resting gently on the wall as though it were sacred. "You think I'm the villain," she whispered. "But I gave her something you never could order. Structure. Love without indulgence." "That's not love," he said hoarsely. "That's cruelty dressed as purpose." Clara's eyes glistened. "You sound just like Elena. Always confusing weakness for compassion." For a moment, silence filled the space between them, raw and heavy. Then Elliot moved. He reached past her, searching for the switch he'd seen earlier, the small metal latch that controlled the locks. Clara tried to block him, her nails scraping against his sleeve. "Don't you touch it," she cried. But Elliot's hand found the mechanism. He yanked it down. Somewhere above, the locks released with a deep, metallic thud. Maggie's voice carried from upstairs. "It opened! Go, go!" Elliot turned toward Clara. Her expression had gone utterly still, eyes wide but unreadable. "You'll ruin everything," she whispered. "Everything I built for you." Elliot took a step back. "You built a prison, Clara, and I let you." Her face softened, as if she pitied him. "You'll regret this." He shook his head. "No, but I'll regret not seeing sooner who you really were." She didn't move when he turned to leave. Her voice followed him up the stairs, cold and low. "You can't hide from guilt, Elliot. Even love won't save you from it." He paused, his hand gripping the railing, then looked back one last time. "Maybe not. But love's the only thing worth trying for." Upstairs, Maggie had Lily wrapped in a blanket, her own eyes wet with fear and relief. The front door stood open, snow blowing in through the gap. Elliot scooped Lily into his arms and met Maggie's gaze. "We're leaving," he said simply. Behind them, the basement light flickered, then went dark. They stepped out into the freezing night, their breath clouding the air. The sky was endless and quiet, the kind of quiet that only follows storms. As Elliot carried his daughter through the snow toward the car, Lily's small voice trembled against his chest. "Daddy, is she gone?" He looked back at the house, at the faint yellow glow still burning behind the curtains. "Not yet," he whispered, "but she will be." The car engine sputtered, caught, and roared to life. Maggie climbed in beside them. The headlights cut through the snow, and for the first time in months, Elliot felt the weight begin to lift from his chest. As they drove down the long road toward the main highway, the farmhouse grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared into the white. But far behind, in that dark basement, a single red light blinked once, then faded out. By dawn, the snow had stopped falling. The sky above Montpelier was a soft watercolor of gray and rose, and the world smelled of pine and cold air. Elliot's truck moved slowly through the winding road toward his sister's farmhouse, the tires crunching over frozen gravel. Lily slept in the back seat, her small hands still clutching the ear of her stuffed rabbit. Maggie sat quietly beside him, wrapped in her old wool coat, watching the pale horizon unfold. Neither spoke for the first hour. There was too much to process, and silence felt safer than words. Only when the faint outline of a barn appeared through the mist did Maggie finally whisper, "She'll be safe here." Elliot nodded, his voice hoarse. "I should have seen it sooner. You were grieving," Maggie said softly. "And grief blinds people in ways they don't realize." He gripped the steering wheel tighter. "That's no excuse for letting it touch her." Maggie turned toward him, her voice calm, steady. "Maybe not, but you stopped it before it became something worse. That's what matters now." They pulled into the long driveway leading to the farmhouse. The porch light was on, glowing warmly through the fog. Elliot's sister, Marion, stood waiting on the steps, her heavy winter coat buttoned to her chin. She was in her early 50s, with kind eyes that had seen too much loss and learned to keep moving anyway. When she saw them, she ran forward, pulling Lily gently into her arms the moment the truck stopped. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, pressing a kiss to her niece's cold forehead. "You're home now." Elliot's shoulders sagged, the first breath of relief escaping him in weeks. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and firewood. A kettle sang quietly on the stove. Marion led them into the living room, where an old quilt hung over the sofa. "You'll stay as long as you need," she said firmly. Lily curled up on the couch with her rabbit, eyes half closed. Maggie sat beside her, brushing the child's hair gently. The warmth from the fireplace painted everything in gold. Elliot stood by the window, staring at the snow-covered hills beyond. "Marion," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something. About Clara." His sister looked up, her expression steady. "I heard enough in your voice when you called," she said. "You don't owe me the details. Just promise me she can't reach you or Lily again." Elliot hesitated. "I locked the house, but she's clever. She planned everything." Marion walked over, placing a hand on his arm. "Then we'll plan better. You have friends here. The sheriff's my neighbor. He'll listen." He nodded slowly, but his gaze stayed fixed on the window, where the early light stretched across the frozen field. "It's strange," he murmured. I thought leaving would make me feel free, but it just feels empty. Maggie looked up from the couch. That's what healing sounds like at first, she said softly. Quiet, like something missing. For a long while, no one spoke. The kettle clicked off. The fire popped softly in the hearth. Lily stirred under the blanket and whispered. Daddy? Elliot knelt beside her. I'm right here, sweetheart. Can we stay here forever? He smiled faintly. For as long as we need to. She nodded, closing her eyes again. Outside, a crow passed across the pale sky, its shadow moving briefly over the window pane. Marian drew the curtains shut. Let's keep the world out for a while, she said quietly. In the stillness that followed, Elliot realized that for the first time in years, there were no echoes, no creaks behind the walls, no whispers in the dark, only breathing, only warmth. Only the fragile peace of people who had almost lost everything, and were just beginning to find their way back. The next morning, sunlight poured through the farmhouse windows, scattering across the kitchen table where Marian had laid out coffee, oatmeal, and a plate of biscuits that smelled faintly of butter and honey. Lily sat at the table with her rabbit, eyes brighter than they'd been in weeks. She laughed softly at the steam curling up from her mug of cocoa. Maggie watched her with quiet relief, then turned toward the window. She's finally sleeping through the night, she said. That house was suffocating her. Elliot stood near the door, coat already on, a folded sheet of paper in his hand. Clara's forged therapy plan, her handwriting still neat and controlled. I'm going to the sheriff, he said. It's time. Marian looked up from the stove. I'll drive you. He shook his head gently. You've done enough. If she tries to come here, Marian's voice was steady. She won't get close. I know half the deputies in this county and the rest owe me pie. That drew a small smile from him. I almost forgot what laughing feels like. He left soon after, the snow crunching under his boots as he crossed the porch. The air was sharp but clean, the kind that made each breath sting and heal at the same time. At the sheriff's office, the wood stove burned low, filling the room with the smell of smoke and old coffee. Sheriff Hank Delaney, a broad-shouldered man in his 60s with a gruff voice softened by years of kindness, listened as Elliot told him everything, the hidden room, the recordings, the manipulation. When the tape played, the sheriff's expression barely changed, but his eyes darkened. Good Lord, he murmured. How long's she been at this? Months, Elliot whispered. And I didn't see a thing. Delaney leaned forward. Abusers like her count on good folks looking the other way. You're seeing now that's what matters. He promised to send deputies to the house that same afternoon. You'll stay put here with your little girl until we call. Understand? Elliot nodded. When he returned to the farmhouse, Maggie was out back hanging laundry in the cold sunlight, and Lily was building a small snowman under Marian's watch. The sight hit him with a strange mixture of joy and grief, the ordinary beauty of a life he'd almost destroyed by neglect. He joined Maggie by the line. The sheriff believes us, he said. They'll take her in today. Maggie exhaled, watching the clouds of her breath fade. Good. Maybe now that house can breathe again, too. He nodded. I thought I'd never be able to face myself after this. You just did, she said softly. For a moment, the wind rustled through the pine trees behind them, carrying the sound of distant bells from the small church down the hill. It was Sunday. Families would soon be gathering for service, holding hands, singing hymns about grace and return. Elliot looked toward Lily. You think she'll remember all this? Maggie followed his gaze. Children remember love more than pain if they get enough of it afterward. He smiled faintly. Then we'll make sure she does. They stood together, watching Lily shape the snowman's tiny face, the sunlight warming their cheeks despite the cold. Later that afternoon, as the fire crackled and shadows stretched across the living room, Marian came in from the porch holding her phone. They've got her, she said simply. She's in custody. No one spoke at first. Only the sound of the fire filled the silence. Then Lily looked up from her drawing and asked, Can we go home now? Elliot hesitated, then crouched beside her. Not yet, sweetheart. But someday, when the house feels like love again, we will. And she nodded, as if that was enough. When night fell, Maggie sat by the window, watching flakes begin to fall once more. Funny, she whispered, how snow can make even the hardest ground look gentle. Elliot glanced over. That's what forgiveness does too. He didn't know if he was talking about Clara or himself. Maybe both. Outside, the snow deepened again, covering the tracks that led from the past to the present, leaving only stillness and the faint promise of spring waiting beneath the ice. Spring came late to Vermont that year. The thaw was slow, as if the earth itself needed time to trust the warmth again. Patches of green pushed timidly through melting snow, and the air filled with the scent of damp soil and pine. It had been 3 months since that night, 3 months since the locks, the flight, the truth. Life at Marion's farmhouse had taken on a rhythm that felt honest, steady. There was laughter again, though quiet, like something learning to walk after being broken. Elliot sat on the porch most mornings with a cup of black coffee and a wool blanket over his knees. From there, he could see the orchard at the edge of the field, where Lily liked to play among the apple blossoms. Her laughter carried across the breeze, soft and clear. Maggie joined him, bringing fresh muffins from the kitchen. "She's drawing again," she said with a smile. "This time it's not walls or shadows, it's trees and birds. She even drew you sitting under the porch light." Elliot chuckled softly, though his eyes glistened. "She never stops amazing me." Maggie looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "You know," she said, "for a while, I thought the only thing stronger than fear was guilt. But watching you two, maybe it's love after all." He turned the coffee cup slowly in his hands. "I'm not sure I deserve it." Maggie's voice softened. "That's the point of love, Mr. Warren. It doesn't wait until we deserve it, it shows up anyway." Down in the field, Lily knelt in the grass, placing wildflowers into a small jar. When she noticed her father watching, she waved. He raised a hand back, smiling in a way that reached his eyes this time. Inside the house, Marion was baking again, the smell of cinnamon drifting through the open windows. The radio played a slow tune from another decade, a melody about coming home after a long winter. Later that day, Elliot drove into town to meet Sheriff Delaney. The case against Clara was nearly closed. She had pleaded guilty to unlawful confinement and endangerment, her once perfect voice breaking in the courtroom when confronted with the footage. There would be no more hidden rooms, no more whispers behind walls. When Elliot returned, dusk was falling. He found Maggie sitting on the back steps, brushing crumbs off her apron. "Did it go all right?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "It's over." She studied his face. "And how do you feel?" It took a deep breath, like the house inside me finally unlocked. Maggie smiled softly. "Then maybe you can start building a new one." He glanced toward the field, where Lily was chasing fireflies with a jar, her laughter ringing like wind chimes. "I think I already have." The sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in pale gold. A breeze moved through the trees, carrying the scent of lilac and earth. For a long time, no one spoke. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was the kind that came after a storm had passed, a silence full of peace, of breathing, of life continuing. Elliot looked toward Maggie and said quietly, "Tomorrow, I'll take Lily to see the old house." Maggie's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" "Yes," he said. "She deserves to see that the darkness doesn't win. Not when we face it together." The next morning, the road back to Shelburne shimmered under the spring light. Snow still clung to the edges of the woods, but the air was warmer, alive with the sound of melting streams. Elliot drove slowly, his hand steady on the wheel, Lily humming softly beside him in the passenger seat. Her jar of dried flowers sat between them, tied with a piece of blue ribbon. When they reached the old farmhouse, the gate creaked open as if recognizing them. The house stood exactly as they'd left it. White paint faded, windows dusted with pollen and memory. Yet the silence was different now. It wasn't menacing anymore. It was waiting. Maggie stepped out first, carrying a small basket of candles. "I thought we'd light one in every room," she said, "for light to stay this time." Lily held her father's hand as they crossed the threshold. The air smelled of dust and cedar. Sunlight streamed through the cracks in the curtains, scattering across the wooden floor like pieces of gold. In the living room, the furniture was still covered with white sheets, soft and ghostly. Elliot walked to the mantel, where an old family photo sat him, Elena, and baby Lily at a harvest fair years ago. The edges had curled, but the smiles were still there. Lily tugged at his sleeve. "Mom looks happy." "She was," he said quietly. "She loved this place." Lily thought for a moment, then said, "Can we love it too?" He looked down at her, his heart swelling with something fragile and fierce. "We can try." They moved through each room together, the kitchen, The hallway, the small reading nook by the window, placing a candle on every windowsill. Maggie lit the wicks one by one, her hands steady. Each flame brought warmth back into the corners, chasing away the cold that had lived there too long. When they reached the basement door, Lily hesitated. Her small hand gripped her rabbit tightly. "Do we have to go down there?" Elliot knelt beside her. "No, sweetheart, not today. The dark's just a room without light. We'll fill it when we're ready." Lily nodded, resting her head briefly on his shoulder. "Then maybe tomorrow." They returned upstairs. By the time they reached the porch, the afternoon sun had turned golden. The house behind them glowed softly from the candlelight within, as if, for the first time in years, it was breathing again. Maggie leaned against the railing, watching the fields sway in the breeze. "It's strange," she said, "how a place can hold both pain and grace, side by side." Elliot nodded. "Maybe that's what makes it real." He looked down the long road leading away from the house, toward the horizon where new days waited. Lily ran ahead, laughing as her rabbit bounced in her arms. Maggie smiled. "She's not afraid anymore." "No," Elliot said softly. "Neither am I." For a while, they stood there in quiet, the wind playing with the curtains behind them, carrying the faint scent of melted snow and apple blossoms. Then Lily's voice rang out from the yard. "Daddy, look!" Elliot turned. She was pointing toward the orchard. At the base of one of the trees, something small and bright had bloomed a single rose, pink against the pale grass, defying the last of the frost. He walked over, knelt beside it, and smiled. "It's too early for roses," he said. Maggie's voice floated behind him. "Maybe not this year." Elliot gently touched the petals. The flower trembled in the wind, but didn't fall. "Come on, Lily," he said finally. "Let's go home." As they walked back toward the porch, the farmhouse stood quiet behind them. No shadows, no whispers, only light, flickering through the windows, like a heartbeat that had finally found its rhythm again. And for the first time since everything began, the Warren family felt whole. There are stories that end with silence, not because nothing is left to say, but because peace finally has a place to rest. The hidden door was one of those stories. After the storms, after the voices behind the walls had faded, the Warren house stood bathed in sunlight again, and a father finally learned that love, once nearly lost, could still rebuild what fear had broken. You could almost imagine the sound of that Vermont wind brushing against the porch rail, carrying laughter instead of echoes this time. Elliot no longer lived behind guilt, and little Lily, the child who once whispered to the dark, now filled her drawings with trees, light, and open skies. The same rooms that once held sorrow now smelled of apple pie and cinnamon, the same way they used to before tragedy settled in. Sometimes, redemption isn't loud. It's the quiet act of showing up every morning, pouring coffee for someone you love, and choosing kindness again and again until the house inside your heart feels like home. And Maggie, the humble soul who refused to look away, reminded us that goodness doesn't always wear a crown. Sometimes it wears an apron, wipes tears off a child's cheek, and whispers, "You're safe now." In a world that moves too fast, maybe that's the kind of hero we still need. The lesson here is simple, yet profound. Love and forgiveness can rebuild even what time and sorrow tried to destroy. No matter how dark the rooms of our lives may seem, a single act of compassion freely given, quietly offered, can turn fear into faith again. Everyone deserves a home made of understanding, not perfection, of effort, not wealth. Because happiness doesn't bloom in flawless gardens, it grows in the hands that keep tending, even after the frost. It's a truth familiar to many who have lived long enough to know that peace doesn't come from what we own, but from who waits for us at the dinner table, from who forgives us when we fall short, from who keeps the porch light on even when we're late coming home. Like that light by the window on a winter night, kindness may seem small, yet it's strong enough to guide us through the darkest miles of life. So tonight, as you listen, maybe pour yourself another cup of tea. Look around your quiet living room, and remember, even broken things can glow again under the right warmth. If this story touched your heart, type 1" the comments below. And if you think it could be better, or want to share your thoughts, type 0. Because stories, like people, grow stronger when they're shared. And wherever you are, may your home be warm, your heart be gentle, and your light never go out.